Woolworths shareholders yesterday grilled company chairperson Simon Suzman on the retailer's trade relations with Israel at its annual general meeting that was held in Cape Town. Questions were put to Suzman, included whether Woolworths is absolutely certain that none of its products are sourced from occupied territories in Gaza and what impact the ongoing boycott Woolworths campaign has had on the bottom line of the company. Suzman responded that those types of questions were not relevant to the company's financial statements. The AGM was at times unruly as shareholders shouted, demanding answers. Earlier, pro-Palestinian group BDS staged a march to the Woolworths headquarters in the CBD, where some of the members said they would participate in the AGM and raise questions with the company. Well, we anticipated the severity of the story on Monday morning when we were joined by private Woolworths shareholder Martie Momberg, as well as Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions South Africa coordinator Mohammed Desai. Now today, Mohammed joins us again to give us the latest, as well as, well, representing a group of businessmen who hold shares in Woolworths this morning. Nadia Hassan, very good morning to you. And we're also joined by the COSATU spokesperson, Mr. Patrick Craven. COSATU has this year pledged its support for this campaign. A very good morning, and thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Mohammed, I understand you're fresh back from Cape Town at what was a rather unruly AGM yesterday. Just give us the broad strokes, how you view this meeting and what transpired.
Well, it was fun and it was good. It was good for us, perhaps bad for the Woolworths management. They were exposed on several fronts and they didn't see many of the questions that were coming for them. For example, we had found a loophole. One of their companies, which they've recently bought over in Australia, David Jones clearly stocks a very controversial Israeli soda maker called SodaStream, which is in complete violation of international law. So many of the questions that we posed to the management were either dealing with the financial statements or dealing with the reappointment of management committee members. And I think that the management really thought that they could have this discussion just under the general items. However, we were pretty much well prepared, so we could actually throw questions thick and fast at the management, which left them pretty flustered and embarrassed, but also exposed some of the mistruths. For example, the chairman claimed that he had been responding to all shareholders' concerns that have been coming in via email. And then Martie Momberg, who was present actually at the AGM, raised a hand and said, "Mr. Chairman, I've been emailing you for several weeks now and you haven't responded to not one of my queries." And so at the end of the day, they were caught red-handed. And I think it was a major leap for the campaign, because once the video recording of the AGM becomes available, many of our supporters and members of the public will see the kind of predicament that Woolworths is in, trying to defend the indefensible.
Nadia, now you represent some of these shareholders. I just want to point out to our viewers, before I ask you to respond to that, is that we asked Woolworths to come and join us here today. They told us we should send a camera to the head office and they will think about giving us an interview. Well, I think it's for you to judge at home what that is all about. But we did ask Woolworths. They sent us a statement about last week's proceedings and not about the AGM, so we figured it was rather useless to talk about that. But Nadia, if I can then ask you to just, as the representative of the shareholders, the communication process with management, just give us an insight into that.
Evan, I think that the big issue is really that Woolworths is belligerent and hasn't made any efforts in terms of the overtures that BDS have made from the outset to talk about the issues or try and find a way to resolve them, knowing what the call is really from BDS. So I think in terms of yesterday's AGM, from a shareholder's point of view, it's concern to us. I mean, it's a win for Mohammed and the BDS campaign. But with all honesty, how can a chairman stand up there and bungle and not have an answer? This issue's been in the media now for some time. And it just shows that they've shown their hand. They're not committed. And I think that is the bottom line.
The shareholders said the first step should have been meeting BDS and clearing theirs up. Is that still your first port of call? And what has been the reasoning why they haven't met with BDS until now?
Of course, that is always the first point of any discussion. There's mediation, there's all of the normal processes that take its natural course. And the fact that Woolworths do not want to do that gives you the impression that it thinks it's more important or bigger than everybody else. And that is a worry, because it doesn't matter how many billion rand your company is worth. What really matters is your bottom line around ethics around human rights issues and the sustainability of businesses and viability of communities that support that business.
Well, that's a very interesting view of the shareholders, but Patrick Kasatu, you represent the other side of the coin in South Africa in a way. How do you view this kind of standoff that's developed around Woolworths and then the response from the management of this company at times towards its own shareholders?
Well, we fully support the BDS campaign and the shareholders. But I think it's important to remember that it's first and foremost a campaign against the Israeli government, against the military attacks on the people of Gaza, on the continued occupation of the West Bank, and the latest Israeli settlement, which President Zuma himself condemned yesterday, quite rightly. And we shouldn't just see it as a campaign against Woolworths. That campaign is part of a broader campaign of boycott, disinvestment and sanctions, which is in many ways modelled on the campaign against apartheid South Africa. And we should never forget that that was a very successful campaign, played a big role. And we believe this campaign can do the same. And it isn't just targeting Woolworths. We've said that there should be a boycott of all products coming from Israel. And so, as well as Woolworths, consumers in other shops should check the labels and avoid buying any goods which are clearly from Israel. But I think Woolworths have certainly put themselves in the headlines because of their belligerent attitude. What we're asking of Woolworths is simply to take a stand, which will cost them next to nothing, because as I understand it, the quantity of goods coming from Israel is relatively small, but would gain enormous public relations benefits, whereas in fact their current stance is doing exactly the opposite. They've made the same mistake as Cell C when somebody put up a big poster. They're forgetting the old rule that the customer is always right. And in this case, the customers who are refusing to shop there because they will not refuse to stock Israeli goods are people who they should be trying to win back rather than alienating even further. And
these days, you know, in the era of social media, the customer has even more of a voice than they've ever had before. But let me talk about that belligerent attitude, Mohammed, that Patrick has just alluded to. Woolworths, or let's talk about Mr. Suzman in this case, who led the meeting yesterday. He was quite belligerent. He spoke about things that it's not relevant to the company's financial statements. What's your response to that and the attitude that underlies that?
Well, the chairman in particular and the other board members as well, seem to be going out of their way to defend this trade with Israel, which makes us begin to ask questions. Why are you going so out of your way to protect a 12 million rand trade relationship when you're losing, at a very conservative estimate, almost 8 million rands a month? It just doesn't make business sense, neither does it make moral sense. But we also ask very simple questions. We asked Mr. Suzman that you are importing figs from Israel. We have some of the best figs in Prince Albert. Prince Albert has about 10 fig growing farms. Why aren't we supporting the local economy? And the management of Woolworths simply couldn't answer any of these questions and kept on evading them and referring them to the next meeting or to certain members of management to report back on, which are just delaying tactics. So it would seem as if Woolworths or people within Woolworths have a particular agenda in wanting to maintain that trade relationship with Israel. Mr. Sussman, in an off-the-cuff comment, suggested that one of the reasons for defending the Israeli trade ties is because of the kind of backlash that will come from pro-Israeli supporters, which means that Woolworths is taking a stand. Woolworths is taking the side of pro-Israeli supporters as opposed to the growing number of shareholders, the growing number of civil society organizations, trade unions, and activists that are calling on the company to terminate that trade relationship. But one thing that was very successful yesterday, Eben, is that we managed to actually reach out to some of the shareholders that were present at the meeting. One gentleman, for example, who wasn't aware of this issue, he came up to us later on and said that he disagrees somewhat with our position, but he'd like to commend the fact that activism and young people are still involved in these kind of issues. So that was some sort of positive feedback from the shareholders that were present.
Nadia, you represent the shareholders. Just give us a quick roundup of the views after yesterday's meeting, what the consensus were amongst the shareholders, and then if you can maybe map the way forward as the shareholders see it.
Eben, I think from the shareholder point of view, I've been mandated to come across quite strongly and to say that supporting local is really important. Apart from the issues raised around investing in Israel or anywhere else, it's a bigger issue of the confidence in South Africa as a country. And with more investment and more confidence in the companies that operate here and are listed here, that we should be more responsible. I think also there are broader issues in terms of human rights. And it's quite apt. This is the launch of 16 days of activism against women and children. And looking at the scourge that we just coming out from Palestine, 2,100 people killed in such a short time. And it was a targeted campaign at women and children. So for us, that is really, really an outrage, to put it mildly.
Mr. Craven, support local. That must really strike a chord with you, who represent at times the marginalised groups within South Africa. And by buying from overseas and not supporting local, those are the people that are suffering. How do you view this?
We certainly agree with that campaign, although I think it's important to separate it. To some extent, it isn't the same issue. We have long argued that the government removed protective tariffs too quickly and allowed a flood of imports, mainly from China rather than from Israel in terms of bulk. But that's a separate issue. We're not boycotting, calling for a boycott of goods from any other country. We're calling for policies which will, as you say, shift consumption towards a local produce. The Israeli issue is different. There it is clearly political and humanitarian.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's similar to the anti-apartheid boycott campaign. And that is why we are saying that Woolworths should not necessarily buy everything from within South Africa. We appreciate that there will always be products which we can't produce here, but that in the case of Israel, irrespective of whether it's economically, financially to their benefit, they should take a stand on principle in line with people all over the world who are saying the Israeli regime has now stepped outside acceptable norms of political behavior. And we've likened it, in fact, to the apartheid regime. We've called it the apartheid state of Israel because many of its policies are, in fact, very, very similar and require the same kind of international response that we saw to those policies when they were adopted here.
Mohammed, let's go back to the BDS campaign quickly. You've now been banned from protesting at Woolworths stores, if I'm accurate. Is this a court order that you plan on defying? And maybe you can give us the picture as to what sort of route you guys are taking forward from now.
Well, Woolworths is trying to, and in fact, even at yesterday's AGM, they're trying to spin it as if they've got an interdict against BDS South Africa. This is not the case. BDS South Africa came to an agreement with Woolworths, which was then finalized through a court order. We agreed that we want Woolworths to meet with us face to face on the 10th or on the 10th of December or before the 10th of December, which they agreed to. And in good faith, BDS South Africa agreed to tone down on certain protest actions, including protests within the Woolworths stores. However, this only applies to BDS South Africa, firstly. But secondly, the campaign will be intensified because the festive season is coming up, and this is a sort of soft spot for the company. So the campaign will intensify, but we are looking forward to a meeting with the management of Woolworths face to face. We hope that they will come there in good faith with the vision and the foresight of wanting to resolve this issue. But if those talks come to a deadlock, then we will continue with the campaign, and we will also meet Woolworths in court early next year. We do have a good team of lawyers, and we're looking forward to giving them a run for their money. Them taking us to court was probably one of the better things that they could have done for our sort of PR, because they really took this issue to another level, and especially in the arrogant way in which they engage with the media. They just refuse to give any sort of comment and thing. And in the process, we've just managed to get the boycott out there to many, many, many more supporters of the BDS campaign.
Yeah, certainly pushed it into mainstream media as well. But I'm telling you, you're going to need a very good set of lawyers, because I'm sure Woolworths have access to the very best themselves, Mohammed. But Nadia, if you can maybe just give us your final remarks as the shareholder representative, and then maybe talk about good governance principles for Woolworths going forward.
Eben, in terms of shareholders, the private shareholders are obviously comforted by the fact that the judge has ruled that Woolworths will meet with BDS, and that shows confidence, I think, in the importance of the call from BDS and for the shareholders in terms of ongoing profitable growth for the company. I think it's not only private shareholders. As consumers, we also all have a right. With Consumer Protection Act, it's around being more vigilant around labels, around voting with your feet and your money, and knowing where you want to put that money. So that is particularly important. And I think going forward, the shareholders are what has been interesting, I think, from my point of view. I have had numerous calls from other private shareholders pledging their support and wanting to get involved in the campaign or in some way show their confidence in that campaign to go forward. So really, from shareholders, from consumers, as a corporate company that benchmarks itself globally and locally, it's particularly important that you can't be a good corporate citizen and say that you're apolitical. You take a principled stand, and that is the basis on which we believe.
That is the world we live in today. Final remarks today belong to you, Mr. Craven. Please just contextualize this whole thing for us.
Yes, we must bring the debate back to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. That is the key issue. These are people who we've been supporting for many, many years in an absolutely justified and legitimate struggle against the occupation of territories, against military attacks which have led to thousands of deaths of mainly civilian people, women and children. It's an absolutely intolerable regime in Israel, and the world must unite to do everything possible to reach a settlement which is acceptable to the people of Palestine. And the boycott, disinvestment and sanctions campaign is one of the tangible ways in which ordinary people can get involved, and we would urge them not to buy Israeli goods, not to deal with Israeli companies until a settlement has been reached, endorsed by the people of Palestine.
Thank you very much. Succinct and to the point and at the heart of the matter. Thank you, Patrick Craven from COSATU, for joining us today. Nadia Hassan, who represents the shareholders of Woolworths, and then, of course, Mr. BDS South Africa, Mohammed Desai, joining us this morning. And before we wrap it, I would just like to point out to you, we invited Woolworths, not for the first time, to join us here today to give us their views and how they view this. But their response has been rather belligerent towards us as well, telling us that we should send a camera to the headquarters and they will then think about doing an interview with us. They will not come to our Sea Point studio to join us for a live link or even come to studio here. Sad, but that's the way it is, and that's the way that they're playing it in the mainstream media at the moment. Thank you.